Next, we're going to have George Hendrickson running for U.S. House. He's going to talk here a little bit.
So I've gotten away with having quite a bit of free time tonight and watch everybody else get up here and give their best. And you know, it's nice to see so many bests being given. You know, I'm a newcomer to this whole process. I'm a newcomer to running for anything, and so you know, all of this to me is just a little slightly out of my initial comfort zone. Historically speaking, my primary job is that I'm a dad. You know, I'm a father of 3. I'm a husband of 1. I own a small business. You know, prior to my present circumstances, I was a full lines fire and casualty insurance agent for years. I've been a police officer. I was a bail bondsman for a long time and did fugitive recovery and was on the road a lot with that job. And so I've had a colorful career, with most of it rooted in a form of law enforcement, one form or another, and I enjoyed that. And as life grows, though, and changes, so do the things that you do and the circumstances that you follow. And one of those circumstances that is ultimately what got me here today is that my wife gave birth to our 3rd child, the most beautiful little boy I had ever seen. And about the 3rd day, as we're enjoying this beautiful, our 3rd little addition to our household, we notice that something funny keeps happening. He keeps turning blue, and he keeps doing something that looks like he's holding his breath. And so, of course, we bring the medical staff in right away every time he does it. Nobody really is quite sure what's going on. And within a couple of days, we're discharged from the hospital, and we bring our beautiful bundle home with us. And we notice that this is starting to happen more and more. We're starting to notice this happening while he's sleeping, and so, we start getting neurologists involved, and they're running tests on him, and they're not finding anything abnormal, and but yet this child keeps suffocating, and so time's going on, and we're watching this happen, where this is happening 3, 4, 5 times a day. And so so I would be holding him, and then all of a sudden he just turned blue. And so they started worrying that maybe he had Sandifers, or he had a hole in his heart, or there are a lot of conditions that mimic this kind of thing. It's all serious conditions. And so we're all lamenting and worrying over this little beautiful boy that was given to us. And so as time was wearing on, we discovered that he may have a condition of laryngomalacia, and that this could be causing what was his suffocating. And what that is polyps in the esophagus. It seals the esophagus shut. And so when we took him to a specialist for that, he scoped him down the throat, said, yes, that's absolutely what's happening. Matter of fact, we need to prep him for emergency surgery. And we took him straight over the surgical tower, and they went in and operated on his throat. And when we got all done with the operation, he says, well, the surgery was a success. The throat is open. Everything looks good. If this continues, you're going to need to see a neurologic specialist, because if this isn't why he's turning blue, then it's going to have to do with his brain function. So months went by, and we're having EEGs done, and they can't figure out what's going on, All of a sudden, finally, one day after we waited entirely too long for the doctor, because the doctor was horribly busy that day and running way behind. I mean, we'd literally been in the office for like 2 hours, and we're finally now leaving. And as we're leaving, he does it right there, as she's walking down the hallway, and she sees it, and was able to diagnose him finally. And so we've determined that what was happening to him was a seizure. So he has epilepsy. So the first thing we do is they start slamming him with huge doses of phenobarbital. Okay, we use a derivative of phenobarbital to kill people in the state in the prison. So phenobarbital is a pretty vicious barbiturate that you give people, but it stops seizures in infants. And so they give him a ginormous loading dose of this and send us home, and he starts doing really, really well. And we're getting monicum of seizure control. And he's not holding his breath as much anymore. And as time wears on, that changes. And he gets better, and we get to a spot where we go like 30 days without a seizure. And so because he'd done really well and he was in the doctor, they decided that, he needs to have a little more medicine. And when that happened, it created another neurological reaction with him, and we never got seizure control back. And so from that point forward, we were, 3-4 medicines at a time, and we can't get seizure control. So as time was wearing on, we discovered that there was a problem in his neck, and they wanted to start fusing the vertebrae on his neck. And so we ended up going to a specialty hospital in Denver. A friend of ours knew the head of the hospital. The head of the hospital called me and said, hey, I was really surprised. It was 9 o'clock at night one night, and he says, tell me about your son. And I told him, he says, you know what, don't do anything. Will you please bring him out here to me? He says, I'll put together a team, and let us have a look at him. So we did that. We rounded up all of his medical records, sent him out there, and we took our bundle of joy and our other 2 bundles of joy that came before him and went out there, and they did. They had a whole team set up for us, and they had, we had an epileptologist, we had a geneticist, and a neurosurgeon. And so as all of them were taking a look at this child, the geneticist decided that since there was this bone abnormality that was in the neck, he wanted to see the rest of the body. And so they did a complete body scan of this child, and we discovered, and this is at 6 months old, that his femurs weren't connected to his hips. So this little child that can't crawl around, well, now we know why he's not crawling around, because his legs aren't hooked up. And so now this poor kid's in a spica cast when he comes back home and has surgery for that, which goes from his armpits to his ankles and holds him in this horrible position. It was terrible. And so, we're into our first 6 months of life with this child, and it has just been a daily trauma. And we still don't know why he's having seizures. Finally, around 9 months old, the epileptologist from the specialty clinic determined that was able to discover that there was a genetic malformation in my son, in the SCN1A gene. And that particular malformation makes him highly susceptible to neurological reactions to different kinds of medicines and ingredients in medicines. And that is why we saw such a huge uptick in his seizures. It's very common with children with an SCN1A, and the actual condition was called SCN1A Dravet syndrome. And it's rare. It happens to about 40,000, 1 in 40,000 people. So now that we know what the problem is, they discover the haploid number, so they know what kind of medicines they can put with the child that work with him, because they've been genetically keeping records for this for about 20 years now. And of course, my son's the lucky kid who has the very first haploid of his genetic number. So he's number 1 of 1. So they have no idea what's going to work with this kid. So as he's growing and his seizures are getting worse, and then we're giving him more and more medicines, we're combining Omphy with Keppra with, all kinds of, and some of those medicines have very harsh reactions, and we're not getting seizure control. And so we finally got to this point where the doctor said to me, he says, George, we are either going to have to increase all of his medications, or you're going to have to take a serious, because I know you're not a fan of that, and he says, so we're going to have to take a look at putting him on a strict ketogenic diet, and you might have to consider medical cannabis as a treatment with it. Now, having been a law enforcement officer, and all of my family been in law enforcement, and some still are, and that wasn't really on my radar. Okay, even though I was at a specialty hospital in Colorado, that wasn't on my radar. And so I went home, and being the good investigator that I am, I sat down and was looking for peer-reviewed studies to back how this would work, not something from High Times or Leafy or something like that. I wanted the real stuff. Well, there was no really good data in the United States. The place, though, that did have really good data was the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And they've been using this as a medicine and researching it since about 1969. And they had outstanding stuff. And so this is where I learned about the endocannabinoidal system that they had discovered. And our body's had it all of its life. And what this does is this endocrine system in your body is made just to process this plant in its whole form. You have receptors all throughout your body, and they react with this as medicine, and it does many, many, many different things in the human body all over it, the full spectrum. I teach on this in other areas in South Dakota. And once we discovered this, once I'd really read that kind of sealed the deal for me. If we've been consuming this plant as a vegetative food for 6,000 years, or however you want to consider we've been here, that's good enough for me. And I think it's good enough for my kid. And so at this point in time, I think, well, okay, great. Now I just You gotta get it here in South Dakota, right? Easy? Wrong. Start the first round of calls to legislators. Who returns my calls? No one. You know, and so finally, I do reach out to one of our senators. And to my pleasant surprise, Senator Curd was absolutely familiar with my story. He had been down this road before with someone else. Not the same syndrome, but very similar syndrome, and had seen positive results from this. So he wasn't completely a stranger to this. So we had an ally. So it's the first year, year one, we're in year 4, so this 4 years ago. I went up to Pierre, ready to fight, ready to try and get legislation. We wrote a legislative bill. It was based on a great bill that came out of Alabama, Jeff Sessions' state, which has legalized medical cannabis in Jeff Sessions' state, but not in our state. Well, anyway, so I digress. But it's a 3-page bill because that's what I was told to bring. Don't give me anything longer than 3 pages. I want a 3-page bill. I bring a 3-page bill. 3-page bill didn't make it past the scrutiny of government officials that apparently get to give the yes/no on things, and so my bill never got to go to the floor like I was promised. Defeat number 1. So I go home defeated, and we then team up with New Approach South Dakota. And we decide to engage with them in doing a petition drive to get medical cannabis on the ballot. And we put together a successful petition drive. Of course, it does get kicked out by the Secretary of State. But due to the outreach from the people in South Dakota, the Health and Human Services decides to take it up themselves. And in doing so, this is when Senator Curd brings forward an oil bill that is very similar to the one that I brought forward, and in some respects was better. And we almost got it to pass. There were a few people that when they hit the floor to talk about it, one of them doesn't understand what 0.3% of THC is, so he told the entire House floor that you can't tell me there's no way this child can't get high on 0.3% of THC. So I don't know if chemistry doesn't work for him, but whatever the case was, that seemed to be the determining factor, and we lost it right there on the House floor. So that was defeat number 2. So then we come year number 3, and we're hearing all this buzz about an oil bill. It's going to go through. It's going to go through this year. It's going to go through. And so we go up in support of this bill, and lo and behold, what we find out is the reason why there's this oil bill that's going to go through is that because GW Pharmaceuticals is bringing this oil bill. Okay, so the wheels have now been greased. There's 4 lobbyists up there, and they're doing their job, that they're paid to do in our political system. And so, as we're looking at the bill, we see some major red flags. One of which gives them an absolute monopoly in the state, and so we fought against a bill that essentially would have, at least a part of an amendment of the bill that would help my son, and but we had to. And we won that part, but they didn't change a certain portion of the language in the bill. And so when it passed, everybody thought they'd given this resounding victory for my son and people like him. But really what they did was they made it even worse, because now they've made CBD a Schedule IV drug in the state of South Dakota that you may not possess without a prescription from a medical doctor. It has to have a track record of being prescribed from a pharmacy according to statute, and of course it has to have FDA approval. So we have a law about something that doesn't exist. This is similar, if you look at the 2014 Department of Ag Act, this is just like trying to outlaw tomatoes, essentially. This is making a tomato a Schedule IV drug. Okay, and so your possession of a tomato could put you in prison for 4 years. The federal government says, nope, it's food. Tomatoes food, and hemp's food. But not in South Dakota, apparently now. So we didn't catch this, because everybody I talked to said, no, it's okay, you can have this. But I kept hearing from other people, and finally this week somebody came to me with something extraordinary about it and explained it in a way that made perfect sense. And now I think it's time we have a legal opinion from Pierre on it. But there seems to be something really, really wrong here. And because according to the law, there's a whole lot of places here in South Dakota that sell it that are in violation of, in felony violation of owning CBD cannabidiol. So that's what brings us here today. So all of a sudden, we're interjected into the political process. We're knee-deep into it, okay? We're becoming advocates, we're becoming educated, we're becoming well-educated. And as we're doing this and we're meeting people, people start reaching out to us, and people with all kinds of problems. We've talked to all across the state that you know, tell me about what's happened to them in their lives and how cannabis could help them. And you know, it breaks my heart watching that and watching my son, and you know, knowing that these are medicines that help people. And so, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing on cannabis because that's not what I'm here for today, but it is what brought me here today. Because if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for his medical condition, if it wasn't for the fact that I love his life so much that I'm willing to risk mine, if I loved him so much that I'm willing to stand up here in front of all of you and everybody else in the state and get completely out of my comfort zone to try and do something right for people, because what I noticed in the political process, and it doesn't matter what political process it is everything is stacked against you, the person. We are losing everything we've had. We are losing every little bit of civil liberties that we've possessed, just teeny little bits at a time. There were a horrendous number of bills that went through the legislature this year, and there was a handful of them that were so restrictive to your civil liberties, it was unconscionable, brought by a Republican. And so, as a dad who has no aspirations to be a politician, all I want to do is love my kids. All I want to do is be the best dad that I could possibly be. And in that process, I hope I'm somewhat of an okay husband. Jury's out, you're going to have to ask my wife, who's stranded in another state right now. We had a convention, but God gave us a blizzard. So there you have it. But we find a way to survive this storm with our son and this process of going forward in politics. Through this process with Eli, went from having success in insurance and success in law enforcement and having, you know, things that we love and need and ample money to buy them, when you all of a sudden have to quit what you do to take care of somebody to keep them alive, you really start having to slim down. And all of a sudden choices become choices you didn't have before. And so all of a sudden you learn that when certain things happen in the beginning, when it was really bad, sometimes you need help. Sometimes you have to reach out to the government for this help. And so we've had to go through a process where at one point in time, when the economy downturned, all of a sudden we've got a disabled kid and no job. We had to get help. We had to get food assistance. And so for the first time in my life, as a very proud dad who was raised well in a decent home, as a child growing up who's never experienced that, all of a sudden I'm at the food line at the church with my kids. All of a sudden I'm humbling myself at the Social Security office to get food stamps in order to feed my kids. And I'll tell you what, it's an experience maybe everybody should go through at least once before they start talking about people that go through it. Because once you've done it, you discover that it isn't what you think it is. And it's not lobsters, okay? I didn't buy a single lobster because I was worried about feeding my kids, okay? It does happen. But the point being is that we've been down this road now. We've been down this road. I've been down this road. My family's had to go down this road where we had to make a choice between feeding our family or paying the electric bill. We had to make a choice with our medicines. We have to make a choice with our medical supplies. I had to go 2 years without a back surgery because we couldn't afford the deductible, because I had to take care of my son and our family's needs. We knew we couldn't afford it. We finally got to the point where I couldn't walk. The pain was so bad, and I had to have the surgery. And after the doctor did the surgery and I recovered from it and everything was wonderful, I am still to this day paying for my share of that surgery. And that's also why I'm not having the surgery on the torn labrum in my shoulder. I can barely lift my son, but it's because I'm in that place where I have to make choices. Like probably every one of you, or you know somebody, or you're real close to it yourself. That is something that is unheard of in Congress. That is something that is probably not even really well heard of in our legislature. But I hardly doubt that Paul Ryan or Nancy Pelosi have ever had to not have a medical procedure for fear that they wouldn't have enough money to pay their light bill at the end of the month. I'm just thinking it hasn't happened. But that's the kind of person we need, looking at bills that are coming across the table to see what we're going to do to help people. When we start talking about reforming welfare, right now there's only two options on the table for reforming welfare, and if you ask me, they're both wrong. You've got one that just says, oh, we'll just cut it and people will get off welfare. No, that's not going to happen. We've seen that happen before. We know what happens when you do that. You have crime rates that go up. You have people that just kind of drop off the face of the earth. Then we have another group that says, hey, let's just throw so much money at it that everybody's fine and dandy. Well, that does nothing either. That doesn't fix it, because it's atrophy. Keeps people in a status where they're not willing to move forward. So what do we do in this case? Well, we have to take a new approach. We need to look at it from the eyes of people who have been there. And I'll tell you what, myself included, and everyone I've talked to, and every single mother I've talked to, the eyes telling me, George, can we bridge the program? Can we make a bridge out of it? Can we extend the benefits? When we hit that threshold, can we get an extension of the benefits to carry us just a little bit further until we're on our feet? So that when we have that new job and we lose all of our benefits, I don't all of a sudden have to choose to go back on disability or go back on welfare so I have Medicaid insurance because my kid got sick? Is there some way we can do this? And I tell you, yes, there is. There are models across this country where it is working. And the long-term projections are saving tax dollars hand over fist because they're bridging people out and making them successful, and the recidivism is not there. They are not returning. They're giving them a way out. We've got a plan for this, and we know it can work. It has to be implemented by the state, though. But we have to make it available from the front end, which actually should be the back end. But that's Congress, and it's the front end now. As you all know, obviously I've been an advocate for medical marijuana, and so I do want to clearly state that I believe in a well-formed. It's one of the few times I'm going to appreciate regulation just so people feel safe about the process. Because it's new and it's something coming forward. I think that it's reasonable to require a medical card and that doctors have to sign off on it, family. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask on us. Especially when we're asking for something that really we should never even have to have asked for in the first place, because it's a tomato. But that being said, we have to move in increments. I'm not a rec person, okay? That's not me. But that being said, I firmly believe that we need to have this deregulated on the federal level. The states need to have the authority and the ability to decide what's right for them. It's not the federal government's job to decide that. The Controlled Substances Act of 1971 has to be repealed. And in that, we'll have the dissolution, or the dissolving of the DEA. I mean, we can take all the money from that, give it back to the states in law enforcement grants, and they can fight meth. Because they don't have to fight pot anymore. Let the states do what they do. If South Dakota decides that they're going to have no part of it, then when I'm done in Congress, I'll have to decide whether South Dakota is a part of my life anymore, for the sake of my son. I hope not. It's been a part of my life all of my life, and I love this place, and I call it home, and that's why I haven't left. And that's why I'm here, because there has to be change. So like many people, I believe that the People's House has been pretty much hijacked by special interest groups and career politicians. It's that simple. I'm neither. I'm not a special interest group. I'm not a career politician. I don't take PAC money. I'm hoping people will donate to my campaign so we become a viable campaign to compete for the hearts of the people of South Dakota. Getting to the brass tacks of things. So what am I going to do in Congress, right? So we got three key things. I mean, we all know that I want citizen legislators there. So I'm a pro-term limits guy, and we know that I want to reduce the size of government. We know that I want continuity of constitutional continuity. I mean, those are no-brainers. But there's got to be at least three main things that we're going to have to make a hard drive on. So those three things are going to be this. One is taxes. We need to have a simplified tax plan. You know, the tax reform bill that just came before us, which is funny they call it a tax reform bill because it's not, it was a stimulus. I mean, if it was a reform bill, the whole thing would be permanent. And so because some of it expires, it's not a reform, it's a stimulus. But it gives a roadmap. It's just going to show a lot of people that haven't been alive long enough to see what happens when you reduce taxes. And so it's either going to do what a lot of our founding fathers have talked about in the Federalist Papers, that it's going to help, you know, stir up the economy, create more jobs and these kinds of things, or it's going to fall flat on its face. And then we're going to be looking at the other alternative, which I don't think it's going to fall on its face. But personally, I think our entire tax system's wrong. So if we look at the Federalist paper, you know, Federalist 21, you know, our author is talking about using a consumption tax. Okay, and I've gone round and round with a lot of people about the different ways of taxing people, but there's two things I don't like taxed. I don't like my property taxed because if I've worked hard and I've paid for my home, but I'm not a wealthy person, and my income is limited, but the house is paid for, but I still have this $300 a month bill I got to come up with to make my $3,600 tax bill at the end of the year. You know, it just, what? I mean, this shouldn't be. You should be able to live on your property without having, there are other ways that we can generate our revenue. And so it's a state issue though, but it is where just where I stand on that. So getting back to the compulsory tax or the consumption tax, what they're talking about in Federalist 21 is the fact that it's actually one of the purest forms of tax, because it's not penalizing you for working hard. It's only taking a portion of what you consume to operate the government. And it works retrospectively without the Congress in showing the Congress whether their taxes are too high or too low. Because if they set their sales tax too high, people quit consuming. The rich people quit buying yachts, and the Trumps quit buying jets, and the George Hendricksons quit buying bicycles, okay? Used ones. But when the taxes go low, all of a sudden I'm buying used cars for teenage daughters. Oh my God. And so does Trump. He starts buying more jets. And so does GM. They open more manufacturing plants, and people have more income in their pockets, and they're spending more money, and everybody's happier. And we watch a tax base that is not penalizing the people or industry. It is fairly equating tax across all spectrums of our country. It eliminates the class tax. There's no more poor people, there's no more middle income tax, and there's no more 1% or high end. Everybody is taxed on the same barrel. It's all according to your consumption. If you need to save tax money, don't spend as much. Less cats, Aaron. Less kitty litter. Less money out. That's tax. Second thing we want to deal with is agricultural free market. Okay, South Dakota is an agriculture state. It's our #1 industry. It drives everything in this state. We need to have free markets, complete free markets for agriculture. But we also have to have good products for them to market. I'm going to get back on the hemp bandwagon here for a minute, but we need industrial hemp in this state. We have a great track record in the past of producing industrial hemp in this state, being one of the highest production states in the country. Right now, the United States imports 170,000 metric tons of industrial hemp from Canada. Why? We can grow that in South Dakota. And when you're growing that in South Dakota, now we're going to create commerce. So if we deregulate it at the federal level, so we can grow it back here so that these fine gentlemen that are running for legislature can get it deregulated here, all of a sudden we've got facilities to be able to make hempcrete, drywall, plastic food containers that are biodegradable. You know, clothes, rope. I mean, the paper. It's endless. What can be used for it. And so I think it's key to sparking the economy in our state. If we're going to have a free market and an open market for ag, I think this is important for ag. And it's not going to run headstrong with corn or anything like that, because, you know, corn's kind of tough per barrel, per bushel. It's good to feed the cows and such. You know, you'll hear people say, well, hemp's great to feed the cows. If you can get $1,000 to $2,000 an acre for the fiber out of your hemp, you're not going to feed it to your cow, okay? You're going to feed the $200 a bushel, $200 an acre, excuse me, corn to the cow. And just trust me, the cow tastes better on corn, okay? The humans do better eating the hemp, but the cows, probably the corn's okay. I'll stick with corn on that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the trickle-down effect of that is just incredible, though. I mean, if we're building new industry to support hemp, then we're building new income, we're creating new wealth, we're not running support businesses, we're not recirculating support money that a service industry does. When you make something and you export a product, you have created new money in your economy. And that is what we need in this state. And that is why we need people who will drive that home. And I have to drive it out there. Number 3 is going to be our favorite topic, but it is one of mine. It's chop bureaucracies. I mean, we have a government that has run out of control. Our federal government regulates just about everything. And the first place I want to start with is the ELDs. Okay, ELDs have got to go away. It was a product of the last administration. It was a feel-good bill about your personal safety on the highways. See, here's the problem with the ELDs, though. And here's why it doesn't help you with the safety aspect. I have a good friend who's a trucker, and I listened to him tell me about the ELD problem. And here's the problem that he faces that most people don't know. So these little computer-controlled modules in their truck track them, in their big semi-truck, tracks their time that they're on the road, and then it sets them up for mandatory rests and stops and these types of things. So let's say he's on a designated journey, and he's 10 minutes out from where he has to make his drop. All of a sudden, his ELD goes off and says, oh, you have to pull over now and rest. You need to take a half-hour break or whatever the regulated break is. Well, let's call it a half hour. I'm not a trucker, sorry. So here he sits there twiddling his thumb for 30 minutes because he's not tired and he just wants to get to where he's going. His 30 minutes are up, so he gets going, gets it in gear, and heads off to a stop. Now he's made it to the stop, so he hits the log on his ELD that he's now at that destination, and he's waiting around 2 hours for them to offload and reload his rig. That's counting on his ELD. So now he leaves, he gets a few hours down the road, and all of a sudden it dings off again. He's got to stop and take another break. So he's wasted 2 hours, now he's wasting another hour, and all counting against his ELD. He's losing thousands and thousands of dollars. If you're making as a trucker anywhere from a buck to $2.50 a mile, and you're being stopped from going 65 miles an hour for 3 hours out of every 8-hour shift, granted 2 of those were load and unload, but even if, an hour out of there, you do that over the course of the year, you're costing this country, its industry, an insurmountable amount of money. I mean, our entire country runs on trucks. There just aren't enough trains to haul what the trucks haul in this country. And when we're costing every single trucking operation this kind of money, tens of thousands of dollars a year, we are stabbing our economy in the heart. The first thing that caused our economy to take its nosedive is when our fuel prices for diesel jumped from $1.50 a gallon to $4 a gallon. I remember because I had an excavation company at the time, and it killed it. Our whole country runs on diesel trucks back and forth across this country, those great men and women that haul our goods from port to port. And what happens when we quadruple or triple the cost of their main product, the fuel? All of our products went and our economy tanked. And we're still trying to fish our way out of it. So ELDs, I think, are something we just got to address. It's got to be taken care of. Insurance companies, they are our best regulator for safety. Insurance industry does not want to pay claims. They make money by not paying claims. So I think we've got a vehicle to regulate the safety aspect of who are lousy drivers and who are not, who are our bread and butter of this nation, besides our farmers. Of course, we have redundant bureaucracies that need to be handled and dealt with, but, what do we have, 17 intelligence agencies now? Can somebody tell me what all 17 of them do that don't duplicate a process? I mean, we need to look into it. Maybe we need them all. I'm not going to say we don't, but I think it needs to be looked at. I think we need to have a cut and kill squad that goes through bureaucracy after bureaucracy in my office. And we look at what they spend and why they spend it and how they spend it, and then we decide whether it needs to live or not. And then we bring it to the floor and try and do something about it, to put the money back in the states where they belong. We need to stop holding states hostage with tax funds, road funds. Everybody had to wait till they were 21 to drink because the federal government held you, Congress held you hostage. We won't give you any money if you don't enact this law, take this liberty away. Well, that's got to stop. I won't support any bill that has that, period, ever. Not in your life. My goodness, that was number 3. Steve?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You're aware that in 1942, hemp for victory was a war crime. Okay. So industrial hemp, yes, it has its place. The other thing, you talked about the ELDs for truckers. As a rancher, you can't load a cattle on a truck and have them sitting someplace getting hot. They're going to die. So, isn't a comment that you can't legislate safety and morality, or you cover what you just said?
Well, it's exactly, that's exactly what it's saying. And even more to the point is it's actually legislation that is costing us commerce. I saw an article that down south, they found an entire trailer load full of chickens, dead. Nobody knows why. I'll tell you why. Probably the ELD. The guy's load had to sit too long in the hot southern sun, and well, might as well unhook. My job's over. You know, I just lost, you know, I don't know what a truckload full of chickens costs, but...
the argument for industrial hemp is, I mean, it was here in 40. It should still be here.
It is, and that's just it. I mean, like I said, in the 40s, South Dakota was the largest industrial hemp production state in the country. And so it needs to get back to that because we've got the ability to do it. We've got the resources. I know the people. I mean, we can make it go.
I would just point out that the products are here already. Yeah. I can go to any Walmart in South Dakota and see hemp as a food product, or hemp products on the shelf in lotions. So the only thing that's being limited is South Dakotans from being able to make a profit off of it. And like you said, the retailers can make a profit, but the actual producers can't.
And I tell you what, there's a lot of savvy businessmen and women in this state that if they know somebody's putting up 10,000 acres of hemp that's going to have 3 harvests per season, and they're going to have 1 harvest for oil, 1 harvest for seed, and 1 harvest for husk. They got 3 different businesses they get to drive on. You know, I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in this. So, and a lot of industry to be built around it that is not going to go away because it's a reconsumable product. I mean, this is a no-brainer. I mean, Mitch McConnell's doing the right thing right now, and if I was in Congress right now at this moment, I would be supporting him with every fiber of my being because he is doing the right thing here. You know, Kentucky right now is the highest production state in the Union. They started out with a small research program, and it grew and it grew, and now they see what it can do. And they're saying, okay, we want this no holds barred, which is how it always should be. So, absolutely.
What was your money figure for the hemp coming in from Canada?
The last one I saw was 170,000 metric tons annually, was the last one I saw. And the last figures I was given by a hemp producer in Colorado who only does industrial hemp, so he's not a medical marijuana grower. He's not a medical cannabis grower. He's just an industrial hemp grower. But he said that their last harvest from this season was bringing in, I think he said, between $400 and $800 an acre for oil and seed stock, and then on the fiber, it was their last harvest. They got $2,400 an acre. So, you know, I mean, and that's not maybe always the norm. That's just happened to be what the economy there is driving at that time. Most of it was being sold for hempcrete and drywall. They make drywall fiber out of it. You know, and of course, which increases its fire and R value. But, you know, the other thing, I was talking to some of these groups, one of them was, you know, they've got a contract to produce a protein for bodybuilding, And the order supply is so huge, they've tapped everybody they have in 3 states and are importing the rest from Canada because they can't get it. Can't get enough.
Can you physically produce any documents or any evidence that marijuana has been the #1 cause of anyone's death in this nation or this state?
I can't, no, because there is no...
Any that you know of?
I've never seen a single record that has showed a person's death from the actual reaction from cannabis. Now, that being said, there are some things you have to be careful of with cannabis with prescription meds, because cannabis is primarily produced or processed by the P450 cytoplasm enzyme in the liver. And so like Onfi that my son would take for seizure control is also processed by that. So if you're giving him CBD and he's also taking Onfi, what happens is the body wants the natural thing that it's made to have because it's got the endocannabinoidal system. So it says, oh no, Onfi, not right now. And it pushes it up into your blood plasma. So if you're microdosing the kid all day long, this Onfi he's taking all day long, usually in huge doses, is floating around in the blood plasma. Well, when the child goes to sleep and the 4 hours passes and the P450 is now available for other medicines, all of a sudden you are flooding the body with benzos, basically high dose, real strong Valium, and that in and of itself can cause seizures and can cause an episode of status epilepticus, or I mean, it can cause all kinds of problems. And so you do have to be careful of those things. So it's not the cannabis directly that's causing the problem, but it is in combination with something. And 5 years ago, we didn't know about this. I mean, that this is what we're learning as more and more children use this as medicine. But that being said, one more thing, then I'll get to. That being said, I'm in Colorado, and like I said, I didn't mean to make this about cannabis, but I watched a child having a seizure. Going status, this is one of those 300 seizures a day kids, and the parent pulled out a vape pen and stuck it in the child's lips when the child was seizing, and I watched that thing glow just once, and she pulled it right out of the child's mouth, and I kid you not, within 3 seconds that seizure stopped. Actually, I don't want the vape. They've got a nasal thing you can do now. It does the same thing, passes straight through the blood-brain barrier. It's a 2.5 milligram burst. Would love to have that. I'd go to prison, I think, for up to 10 years for having it in the state. Now, send me to Congress and I can have it for my son in DC. So, but CJ.
And my follow-up to that is again, I'm talking about adult usage, not medical usage, because I 1000% back you on what you're saying, and I believe that it should be between doctors and patients for the best plan for their children, without any barring of any, if anything's available for a doctor that can help a child, it should be that way. But what I'm talking about is, you said that you're for it being regulated, and which again, in a limited government, only creates more bureaucracy. So don't you find that even in this topic, it's redundant for you to say these things that about this one particular item, because that's what opens the door for them to do that to every other thing that we have out there?
Exactly, but the problem is I want it to happen, and so because I want it to happen, sometimes I have to accept a limitation. I may have to accept it today, but I can work on getting rid of it later. And maybe I can never get rid of it because it's harder to get back a right that you take away. But
That's the point I'm trying to get.
But under your theory, my son will never get medicine in this state.
Under my theory, yes, absolutely he would. If
Wow.
I'm elected governor, he would absolutely have access to that, and there would be a doctor, there would be, if it's commerce or medical, if it's government, if it's medical.
You know, you have a legislature you have to follow, though.
Right, but again, it's if that legislature is repugnant to the very foundation of the constitutional principle that your child should be able to have access to that medicine without any government interference, you're adding a stipulation there that adults have to give up their right to choose what they consume in their body just for your son to have medicine. That's not the actual argument being made here, because if I as an adult can get it from a shop that opens up here in Sioux Falls and is under the Commerce Clause tax regulated because they're in the Commerce Clause, is completely different than a doctor that's regulating it for medicinal use for a child. Those are two different subjects, and I just wanted to point that out.
Well, and the good news for you, CJ, is that if I get my way, you'll have that opportunity if you become governor, because what my job to do is to deregulate it.
Yes,
and turn it back over to the states.
That's why I agree with you.
But in the meantime, I also know what it takes in the state to get it done. So that's why I take that position.
Thank you for answering.
Yep, you're welcome. Anybody else? Steve?
Or would the same result be for a state-run medical marijuana facility, regulated within the state, growers grow it in this state, they produce it, they take it from the time it's produced, to the time it's turned into your oils and that type of stuff. It's regulated within the state, it's legal within the state. You're not dealing with the federal government at that point. You eliminate the federal, the states have the right to do things on their own. In Colorado's doing it, other people are doing it. So initiating a state measure, I don't think you'd have trouble getting that through the legislature and that the governor might sign in a heartbeat. But you can run that facility through your own state. That provides economic growth. It provides you a source for your medical needs. It provides farmers or growers, whatever you want to call them, a need for economic development. So passing the state on state regulations, would that be such a bad idea?
The passing on the regulation, is that what you asked?
What I'm saying is, the state of South Dakota developed their own medical marijuana facility.
Oh, okay, a state-ran facility is what you're talking about.
Right.
Okay.
Growers grow it. The facility, it's all regulated because they're going to watch, that grade of marijuana. It's regulated, it's produced in the state, it's produced in that facility. The state of South Dakota guaranteed its percentage or dosage or whatever. It's pure. It's safe, is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
The legislature has the opportunity to do that now. The governor has the opportunity to sign that bill now, but they refuse.
The reason why I like what was in the last bill better than that is that, one, it creates a whole different bureaucracy within the state rather than licensing the grow to the patient. And so the way, Colorado was pretty smart the way they did it in that, so if I was given a license for my son, that license would include that I could grow at a time, unless a doctor specified otherwise, I could grow 6 plants at a time. And so in that, I would grow those 6 plants in my house in what is required by the state for me to do it safely, okay? Because there's chemical equations and things like that, and people do stupid things and burn their houses down because they're using 600-watt light bulbs and things like that. But it helps eliminate that bureaucracy issue. Now, if I don't know how to process oil, then there's a business opportunity for somebody to have a processing facility to make that oil for me. But if I'm no good at growing it either, that person, you can, like in Colorado, you can give them your grow license. And then they can grow it for you. So I would contract with this farmer to grow that cannabis for me and then process it the way I need it for my son. And then that way I get exactly what I need from the experience that I have of what I know that works for my son from when we lived in Colorado. And so it eliminates such a large bureaucracy for the state. I know when they talked about the hemp thing, they wanted to have SDSU be the overseer of it because the Department of Ag wanted, they didn't have it in their budget and they didn't have the personnel to do it. They just weren't going to be there for it. But I think this way, for me, it allows that rendering that control back to the parent who needs to try different things, different varieties, different CBD levels versus different THC levels versus how the extraction process is made. I don't want somebody telling me how they're going to process my medicine for my kid. I want to tell them how it's going to be processed because personally, I would rather have a 40 plant count and feed the plant to my child raw. Because as long as that plant is not heated up above 248 degrees, the THCA never becomes THC, and it never becomes psychoactive. The plant is inert below 248 degrees. That's probably 6,000 years ago, that's how we were consuming the plant for it to be healthy for us, and that's why we have this entire endocrine system. So to me, the real plight is with deregulation of it in Washington, I would hope that South Dakota would follow the same protocol that Alaska did, where they allowed a certain amount of personal growth right in your own garden with your tomatoes in your own house, you know, and whatever you do there's fine, and just don't take it off your property. If it goes off your property, you become fair game to law enforcement, and you know, and that sets the boundaries for the people that are afraid and for the people that use recreationally versus the people who need it for medicine, who would feed it to their son to keep their son alive. So that's the problem with the state-regulated issue, and so it's just like Medicaid or Medicare for all. You know, I have a big problem with the state regulating an entire industry, because my son at one point in time, he was on clobazam, okay, which is a high-power benzodiazepine again, and we had to have it compounded into a liquid so he could take it, because he was just little. He was 2 years old, couldn't take the big pill. And as long as there's not a commercially made available product, he has to have the other. And so all of a sudden, during this process, they came out with a commercially available product, right, called Onfi. And so Medicaid at this time would no longer pay for the compounding of the clobazam because there was a commercially available one, right? Now remember, we went in to get his medicine because he was going to be out in a day or two, because that's how you get medicines. You can't get them a month in advance because they think you're, you know, a druggie. And so here we are, a couple of days of medicine left. We're going in and to get his clobazam, find out that he can't have it, has to have this Onfi. So we have to scramble and have a prescription written for Onfi now because Medicaid says he has to have this medicine. We get it, then Medicaid says, oh, I'm sorry, we won't pay for it. It's $6,000, you have to pay for it yourself. Oh, why won't you pay for it? Well, it's not FDA approved for children under 4. My son was 2. They're going to kill my son. If my son does not, if you take a child that's 2 years old off of benzos like this, it will cause a psychotic break. They will go into status epilepticus and their brain will cook them to death. So we call my doctor in Denver. We say, what do we do? He says, I'll write you a prescription for 10 diazepam shots, rescue kits. And you give rectally. He says, just every time he sees us, give him one. And we'll just do that for as long as it takes to sort this mess out. I mean, my goodness. Luckily for us, a smart nurse called the manufacturer. The manufacturer gave us a 90-day supply on them. They called the pharmacist and said, as long as he has a valid script, we're paying for it until they get it settled. And so the pharmacy, for once, kept my kid alive. I mean, they actually stepped up and did the right thing at the right time, and I'm ever grateful for that. But that's kind of that whole, the state just isn't going to do it quite as well. I would rather have regulations within the product rather than let it be a regulatory body. I see it as the lesser of two evils, you know, and I see CJ shaking. He said yes, and he thinks that that's better than what I was thinking too. And so, I hope I've articulated it back in a way that you understand. Whereas, as a dad looking for medicine for his son, why I feel that way.
I mean, that gives you a base to start from. You can slowly, once it's accepted, you can slowly work away from that.
Government never gives up control.
What you do is you let the Flandreau tribe have it again.
What's that?
Let the Flandreau tribe do it. If you want to have one regulatory body do it, let the Flandreau tribe do it. They can produce $5 million worth of plants inside of 3 months. I mean, they've got the facility, they know the people, they can get it done. They can make the money. They're sitting on hollowed ground anyway, and you know, they'll and I can give them the license, and they can tell me the varieties they have, and I can say, okay, I want to try this one, but I want you to breed it with this one. And they've got the facility to do that. They've got all the equipment. I mean, that's a turnkey operation with Flandreau.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I would be down for that, because then the tribe's running it, but...
There's several different entities within the state, the tribe.
Yeah.
The state should have their own entity. I mean, it's doable.
It is doable. It is doable.
It's something that needs to be slipped into. I know your situation, you need it now. But to get the ball rolling, get these things started and ease into it, then it's going.
And I'll be honest with you, if we deregulate industrial hemp, and we have industrial hemp growing all over the state, and which is non-psychoactive, you can't smoke industrial hemp to get high. I mean, God, you'd have to smoke a lot of it, and it's still not going to work. But I'll tell you what, I'd be more than happy to go when a flower's on, go chop a plant down and feed it to my kid, because it's still going to be loaded with CBD. I don't care what kind of dashboard you're going to make out of it in Detroit. It's going to be loaded with CBD for my kid. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. I think we've overstayed our welcome here at the hotel, and I appreciate everybody who's been here and the questions from Steve and CJ and Greg and everybody. I thank you very much and have a good night, and be careful driving home if that's what you have to do, and if you're staying the night, have fun with that.
So again, thanks to everybody for coming out. Again, drive safe until next year. Support those campaigns out there, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. My name is George Hendrickson. I'm running for the United States Congress, and I approve of this message.